All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode today. Today, I'm going to be going back to the old school thing that we do, which is answering your questions more specifically. So I'm going to be going over a question from Ashley. She sent me in a question via the regular old website, going to fearcastpodcast.com. She sent me a message over there. If you want your question answered, go over there to fearcastpodcast.com, go to the submit a question link. If you would like your question to be jumped to the top of the list, because I've got like 100 questions in the hopper. So if you want yours to get bumped up to the top, go over to Fearcast Podcast and you can click on the submit, or you can click on record your voice or speak your something. Anyways, it's in the upper right of the page. Record your voice there. It gets sent directly to me. Your voice gets your ticket to the tippity top of the list. You can also send your audio question over Instagram. I'm Fearcast Podcast over there. Send me a DM, press the little microphone button, record your lovely voice, and I will get it, consider it, and likely put it up on a future episode. So we're going to be going over Ashley's question today. I think it's a good one. The short answer is short, but then I'm going to broaden it out a little bit to talk about some broader differences that I think are important to also talk about, and kind of knowing the differences, and also just acknowledging kind of the frustration and annoyingness and difficulty of diagnosis. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But before I get into that, how was everybody else's rapture? Mine did not happen. So either I'm one of the bad people or it didn't happen. So either one. Now I'd get it. I'm not the best person. I'm not the worst. I don't think I'm the worst, but I could be better, but all of us can, right? So there were some fears there were some words, some worries, some scuttlebutt around the internet about whether or not there was a rapture occurring, and it came, and it went, and I didn't really hear any stories. Now, granted, I feel like I'd hear something like on Facebook, like, hey, like my super cool cousin got rapture. Like that probably hit the news, right? But it didn't happen. I made a little Instagram post about this, and so if you saw this, you can ignore it. But I really think it highlights an important thing, is that especially for religious scrupulosity, which I love talking about religious scrupulosity. If you have a religious group question, send it in. I have not gotten one of those in a very long time. We should talk about it more. I think so. But I think it's important when we're talking about religious scrupulosity, which is just the subtype of OCD focused on one's faith. Okay. So there's that worry that, like, all right, well, what if this bad thing happens to me? What if I'm not a good Christian? What if I'm not a good Muslim? What if I'm not doing the right things? What if I violated something and I'm going to go to hell? I'm not saved. Whatever it is, right? My contention is one of the best ways to get through religious scrupulosity isn't to abandon your faith. It's not to abandon your faith. In fact, it's to use your faith, to use the grounded, consistent tradition that you follow, not the fear-based one of OCD and anxiety, right? Because that fear-based one, that's the one that's going to be driving you nuts, right? Because the rules of what I call OCD God are inconsistent. They're weird. They're borrowing from other traditions. They highlight some things and they really negate or eliminate or minimize, whatever it might be, other things that are also very important. And usually that goes against the tradition that you follow, right? That I've heard it said that every religion has kind of an out, right? There's an out, right? You make a mistake here, you do atonement thing there, right? There's a way to be good with it, but OCD won't let you off the hook. It says you didn't do it enough, you didn't do it right, you didn't feel it right, you didn't say the right words in just the right way, or just even if you did it all perfectly, just God hates you, right? So it's never going to let you off the hook. So instead, of trusting OCD God. We want to be trusting your genuine faith with it, to whatever degree that means, right? And doing it and not expecting the feeling to go away. Remember, we're not that's a compulsion, but instead to do the thing as doctrine or tradition permits and encourages, and then you move on. And that's where, again, I think OCD is a feeling problem, not a thought problem. That feeling is going to persist. Yeah, the thought will be there too, but I'm willing to bet the thing that you're responding to is the feeling of anxiety and uneasiness and fear and discomfort rather than just the thought. Because sometimes we have the thought and we don't have the feeling and we don't care. So it's a feeling problem. Our job is to sit with the feeling, acknowledge the feeling, the false guilt, the just lingering anxiety, whatever it is, and to ignore the heck out of it. That's kind of what we want to be doing. So it's more complicated than that, obviously, but I hope everybody's rapture went well. That's the moral of that story. So I think we've experienced, I think it's something I read, it's like we've had, since 2000, we've had 12 raptures or 12 threats of rapture. So I'll see you at the next one, right? So when there's a real credible one, I'll let y'all know. If there's one that comes across my desk or comes across my interwebs and it feels real, I'll let you know. But we don't know. We don't. So we don't. So anyways, see you at the next one. All right, let's get on to Ashley's question. I'll read it. It's very short and to the point. I love these. I'll read it. I'll give the short answer, and I'll give you my very long answer. All right. So Ashley says, my question, or she says, hi. She says, my question is, can you explain the difference between generalized anxiety disorder avoidance and OCD avoidance? She goes on to say, a lot of people with GAD, generalized anxiety, and social anxiety avoid situations that make them nervous. If avoidance is a compulsion, then how would one tell the difference between generalized anxiety disorder and OCD, or pure O for that matter? And they're the same. They're the same. I'll address that again. They're the same. And yeah, fight me on that. Come at me, bro. All right. She ends it politely with, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate your podcast. All right, Ashley, awesome question. So let me start with the fight. Okay, OCD and pure O, they the same. All right. There is no, I don't think there's such a thing as pure O. Yeah, we call it pure O. Pure O is a misnomer, meaning it's the wrong word for something. Pure O implies that someone only has obsessions, purely obsession, but they don't have compulsions, right? So they're only obsessing all day long. They just have the obsession. They're not doing anything about it. They just have the obsession. I think what that is just thoughts. You just have thoughts. If that's the case, you have thoughts. What's going on all day sounds like worry, but what it is mental compulsions, right? So somebody's engaging with mental compulsions. So they're not engaging in outward or overt compulsions. They're just doing stuff up inside in their head, right? And that might be playing stories out from the past, changing little things, and making sure that if they'd made a left instead of a right, maybe their life would be different. Or maybe they're in the past ruminating about a conversation they had and trying to evaluate what they said or didn't say, or what the other person said or didn't say, and how they acted, what their body posture was like, etc., looking to see whether or not they can let themselves off the hook. They could be thinking about the future, right? What impacts will my actions or past actions have on the future? How is my life going to be screwed over, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all just happening in their head. There can also be tracking that's going on, right? So they're not like physically tracking something or washing their hands, but they might be praying internally. They might be watching what they touched, what somebody else touched, right? There's a lot of mental compulsions that can be happening. I think we've done an episode on mental compulsions. If not, we ought to do another one. So that is something we should do. All right. Point is that it's obsessive compulsive disorder because all of those are mental compulsions. They are mental acts, right? They're not something else. It's an action. It's an intentional thing that you are doing that is the compulsion. So it's obsessive compulsive disorder. It just doesn't have any external compulsions. So if you want to fight me on that, go ahead and fight me on it. I am, questions at Fearcast Podcast. You know where to find me. Find me at Instagram. Make it as public as you want. That sounds great. I'll fight you on it. But all right, that's a separate thing. All right, so your question though is, how do you tell the difference between the avoidance tactics between OCD and generalized anxiety disorder. All right, so I'm going to make it short. You can't. They're the same. They're the same. The same thing. It's all to avoid something, right? The avoidance of social anxiety disorder is to not feel the discomfort, is to, one, not feel the discomfort, and two, to avoid that unwanted outcome, right? I'm not going to give that speech in class, or I'm not going to do the presentation in class because students in class are going to think that I'm an idiot. They're going to judge me. They're going to criticize me. So I'm not going to do it, right? Now, by not doing it, they're not being ridiculed. They're not being rejected. The tomatoes aren't being thrown, but they are avoiding, right? And it confirms that thought is true and likely, right? This is the problem with compulsions. In avoidance, this is the problem with, problem with compulsions in general, but avoidance especially. By avoiding it, you are confirming that you believe that that thing is actually going to happen, rather than giving yourself the opportunity to find out that that thing was not going to happen, or is unlikely to happen, or is not going to happen in the way that you imagined it. And what we usually find is when we do the thing, nothing really happens, or something really innocuous happens, or something happens and it's manageable, or it's not terrible. Moral of the story is that the obsession isn't accurate. We learn that that story is really unlikely to come true, and is, all right, to speak plainly, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. So we can learn over time that we can avoid that or ignore that voice. So, and you can spread that out to like, all right, that's social anxiety. You can say it's, we also talk about like avoidance and panic disorder, right? It's, or a specific phobia, right? I'm not going to get on an airplane because it could crash. That sounds really scary. So I'm not going to go on it. Oh, good, I'm safe. But we just confirm that you believe that every plane you're in is going to crash, right? Generalized anxiety disorder, that may be things like some social elements to it. It may be about your health. It may be about money. It may be about your relationships and just kind of general worries about things. And people sometimes then avoid to not have, or to get out of, or not have, or not experience the feelings related to an unwanted event, right? You obviously, well, I don't know if you obviously know, with OCD, all those avoidances are going to be doing your best to just try to avoid that feared story, whatever it might be. So they're going to look ultimately the same. But what I really wanted to talk about, and I'm not going to belabor this too stinking much, but is to talk about the diagnostic differences between generalized anxiety and OCD. I wonder if, Ashley, you're wondering about whether or not you have OCD or whether or not you have generalized anxiety disorder, and you're using avoidances as like the canary in the coal mine to whether or not you have one or the other, or if the quality of one means that you have one or the other. So I just want to talk about the differences between the two. I really want to talk about the confusing nature between them, in the overlap between them, and more specifically, what treatment looks like between them, right? So it's going to get a little bit of a nerd alert around here. I'm going to be reading from the DSM. Get excited, nerds. But I think that's where we can start with this. And then I want to talk a little bit about some like general memes, like some memes that you'll find kind of trying to explain the two. And I want to try to break this down and then make it as simple as possible between the two, ultimately for the reason so that you kind of have an understanding about what we as therapists are looking for, and also to not get into the weeds yourself about whether or not you have generalized anxiety disorder. This is my GAD and this is my OCD, and well, I can't do this tactic with this one, but I can with this one, or oh my gosh, I have both, so now I'm more broken. All right, so let's go broadly. There's so much overlap between the two that that treatment, for the most part, is the same. We have to look at, or what we're wanting to do with both is to recognize that there is a story going on in your mind about something happening that you don't want to have happen. It sounds really scary and worrisome and bothersome. So you're going to do everything you can to not have it. And what we need to do then is to back off of our compulsions. And yes, there can be compulsions that we'll call in generalized anxiety disorder. And we need to sit with the discomfort related to them and not engaging with things that are going to be unhelpful, like those compulsions, like active worry, like avoidances, and recognize that we don't know the future, and the future is scary, but we can rely on what we are observing. We can rely on our past. We can rely on what professionals have said for us. As we take all of that, as we carefully and cautiously move into the future and boldly move into the future, and see what happens. Okay, so that is my broad story. So let's jump into it. Okay, we're going to read from the DSM. So the DSM, for those of you who are not initiated, is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and we are on the fifth edition. So we've gone through a lot of orientations and iterations, and it is not a perfect book. The idea is it's a book that outlines all the identified mental health disorders so that we as clinicians can kind of categorize these things and say, well, these symptoms kind of group up in this way, so we're going to call them this thing. And then there's a corresponding or a set of treatment things that you can do that generally help with that, right? It is not perfect. And I think everybody out there, every clinician out there is going to have their own little pet peeve with it for whatever reason. But I want to read a little bit about it just to show you what it sounds like, So let's start with generalized anxiety disorder, okay? So generalized anxiety disorder, all right, here it is. So it says it's an anxiety disorder. It's defined as excessive anxiety and worry. It says apprehension of expectation. Anxiety and worry occurring more days than not for at least 6 months about a number of events or activities such as work or school performance. Sound familiar, right? It kind of sounds like OCD. It kind of sounds like generalized anxiety, but you could certainly see OCD landing in that. It says the person finds it difficult to control the worry. I mean, yeah, both, right? Then it goes on to say, the anxiety and worry are associated with 3 or more of the following 6 symptoms, with at least some symptoms represent for more, or present for more days than not for the last 6 months. So they go on to say, relentless or restlessness, and feeling keyed up or on edge, feeling easily fatigued or being easily fatigued, difficulty concentrating or mind going blank, irritability, muscle tension, and sleep disturbance. So difficulty falling or staying asleep, restlessness, and unsatisfying sleep. So it sounds very familiar, right? So diagnoses often also go into this section. We'll also say this. The anxiety or worry of physical, so it needs to cause significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So then it has this section. The disturbance is not better explained by another mental health disorder. So anxiety or worry about having panic attacks in panic disorder, negative evaluation in social anxiety disorder or social phobia, contamination or other obsessions in obsessive compulsive disorder, separation from attachment figures in separation. And it just kind of goes on with saying, we have these body of symptoms, but if there's another diagnosis that better explains it or is more, think about that as more specific, then we want to use that diagnosis, okay? But as you can just hear from that, boy, that whole diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder sounds a lot like OCD, doesn't it? So let's move on to then OCD. So it says obsessions, so it needs to have, so it says it needs to have either obsessions or compulsions. And it has both. DSM, calm it down. It needs to have one or the other. All right, so here's what it says. Obsessions are defined by, it says recurrent and persistent thoughts, urges, and images that are experienced at some time during the disturbance as intrusive, unwanted, and that in most individuals cause marked distress or marked anxiety or distress. Let's hear. So that sounds a lot like OCD, right? That sounds like, that is OCD, but it also sounds like a lot like generalized anxiety disorder, right? It says the thoughts, impulses, and images are not specific, simply excessive worries about real life problems, right? The individual attempts to ignore or suppress the thoughts or urges and neutralize them through thoughts or actions, right? Compulsions. Okay. So then it says, what are compulsions? Compulsions are repetitive behaviors, hand washing, ordering, checking, or mental acts, praying, counting, repeating words, and that the person feels driven to perform in response to an obsession or according to the rules that must be applied. The behaviors or mental acts are aimed at preventing or reducing or reducing distress or preventing some dreaded event. All right, so it goes on and on. Let's see here. At some point during the course of the disorder, the person has recognized the obsessions and compulsions are excessive or unreasonable, right? This also may be the case when it comes to generalized anxiety disorder, though there is more of an egosyntonic component to it. But for both, there can be a recognition that they're worrying too much, they're stressing too much, the thing that they're doing is unnecessary or silly. This is that point in it. Oh, excuse me, that section they did drop, but I would agree with that. I just misread that part. Let's see, the obsessions and compulsions are time consuming. This is an OCD. It takes more than an hour per day or causes clinically significant distress, right? And then there's that section, right? The disturbance is not better explained by symptoms of another mental health disorder, right? Excessive worries, generalized anxiety disorder, preoccupation with appearance as in body dysmorphic disorder, difficulty discarding or parting with possessions as in hoarding disorder, goes on and on and on. Okay. So we've gone through the differences or the diagnostic differences between those two. But as you can see, there's a lot of overlap between those two. And you can absolutely see how they can be confusing and one kind of leads to the other. So my contention is that they're so similar, so very similar that that I think the biggest differences that we should be considering are that kind of not being, diagnostic or, basically a overall difference between those two. I often consider is severity of the symptoms, the bizarre nature of them, or kind of the mundane nature of them, the everyday components to it, and the amount of compulsions going on between them. Okay, so these would be my basic points, right? So severity. So the severity between the two, I kind of think about OCD as this spectrum, right? From low key to non-invasive, all the way up to completely taking over your life, right? So the severity of it with some stuff, like you can be worried about your health, right? We all are worried about our health. We're all worried about money. We're all worried about our relationships and our work and et cetera, et cetera. But there's a qualitative difference with someone who is just kind of generally worried about their health and someone who is spending hours and hours worrying about their health, going to doctors, ruminating about it, checking on things, right? Worried about money to fastidiously checking their bank account with not buying anything excessive, always buying the cheapest version of it, sacrificing a ton just to, even though they may have, they may be financially stable, right? So the other component, the bizarre nature of it. Now, this isn't meant to be an insult. It's just kind of the excessive and kind of oddness to it related to the everyday components to it, right? For generalized anxiety disorder, that someone is like worried about the everyday stuff. It's stuff that we are all worried about for the most part, right? It's the commonplace stuff that we kind of stress about. When it comes to OCD, there is a excessive or bizarre nature to it, where it's way above and beyond. It is either not grounded in reality, or it is so far beyond what the average person would worry about, and that kind of ups the ante of severity and kind of can lead up into OCD territory. Lastly, the amount of compulsions, right, both physical and mental. Right? It talks a lot about generalized anxiety being excessive worry, right? Spending a lot of time thinking about things, stressing about things. And now that can absolutely be considered mental compulsions when it comes to pure O. But there tends to not be a ton of physical compulsions. Now, of course, there can be, but when we think about OCD, we think about hand washing, we think about tapping, we think about avoiding using parts of our body, we think about doing very repetitive or ritualistic behaviors, and those things we tend to not find in generalized anxiety disorder. So we were looking for some of those specific acts. Now, some of the other diagnostic differences that I tend to see, or it's not diagnostic, but some of the things that I tend to see that are different also have to do with the specific nature of it, right? So I'll share some of these kind kind of memes that talk, I guess memes or graphs or infographics or whatever they are. They're Venn diagrams that talk about, here's generalized anxiety and the overlap with OCD and kind of the differences between the two. Some of the commonalities, and I'll post one of them here, is that, some of the commonalities: mental rumination, excessive anxiety, reassurance seeking, difficulty tolerating uncertainty, avoidance, and distortion in thinking. But like when it talks about generalized anxiety disorder, thoughts tend to jump from one worry to another. But again, you can find that in OCD, right? So there can be, flavor of the week OCD or something like that. There can be multiple obsessions that can be present. So